The last box was the one with my kettle and my favorite mug, and all I wanted was a cup of tea before collapsing into bed in my new apartment. The mover I'd hired off the Tasker app, a friendly looking guy named Bill, was just supposed to help me with the heavy stuff, but he was still lingering long after the job was done. He was leaning against the kitchen counter, arms crossed over his plaid shirt, watching me with an unnerving stillness that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The job was finished, I'd paid him, even added a generous tip, but he just wasn't leaving. Well, that's everything, I said, forcing a bright smile that felt like it was cracking my face. I busied myself with unpacking the kettle, my hands trembling slightly as I unwrapped the bubble wrap from my world's best graphic designer mug, a cheesy gift from my old colleagues. The silence in the small apartment was thick, broken only by the crinkling of plastic and the distant wail of a siren slicing through the unfamiliar city night. It was late, almost 11 p.m., and the exhaustion of a cross-country move was settling deep into my bones. Sure is, Bill replied, his voice a low rumble that seemed too large for the space. He didn't move. You've got a nice little place here, Chloe. Real cozy. He used my name again. He'd been doing that a lot. Not in the normal, professional way you'd expect from a service provider. He said it with a strange sort of familiarity, as if we were old friends. It had been charming at first. When he'd arrived, right on time at 9 p.m., he was all smiles and folksy charm. He looked like someone's dad, with laugh lines around his eyes and a receding hairline. He'd complimented my taste in furniture, told a few corny jokes, and had been surprisingly efficient, hauling my heavy boxes up the 3 flights of stairs without a single complaint. I'd felt a wave of relief. Hiring a stranger from an app to come to your new apartment late at night felt inherently risky, but Bill seemed like one of the good ones. A genuinely helpful guy just trying to make a few extra bucks. Now, that initial comfort was curdling into a tight knot of anxiety in my stomach. I'd paid him through the app 30 minutes ago. We'd shaken hands. The transaction was complete. My social script had run out of lines for this situation. Thanks, I said, my voice coming out a little too high. It's small, but it's perfect for me. Just need to get everything unpacked. I plugged in the kettle, the plastic base clicking loudly in the quiet room. I needed to fill it, but the sink was on the counter right next to him. I'd have to squeeze past him. A young woman like you, all alone in a new city, he mused, shaking his head slowly. His eyes, which had seemed kind before, now looked speculative. They roamed around my living room, taking in the stacks of boxes, the disassembled bookshelf, the general chaos of a move-in day. Brave. My daughter, she's about your age. I worry about her constantly. The world's not a safe place, you know. Here we go again. He'd mentioned his daughter, Jessica, a few times. At first, it was endearing, a way to build rapport. He'd told me about her struggles with finding a job after college, how proud he was of her. But now, the mention of her felt different. It felt like a tool, a way to create a false sense of connection, to make me see him as a protective father figure. I'm sure she appreciates you looking out for her, I said, keeping my tone light. I decided to brave the journey to the sink, giving him a wide berth. My shoulder brushed against the wall as I squeezed past. He smelled faintly of sawdust and something else, something sharp and unpleasant I couldn't quite place. He didn't move an inch to make room for me. He just watched, his gaze following my every movement. I filled the kettle, the sound of the running water deafeningly loud. I was acutely aware of his presence behind me. I could feel his eyes on my back. My mind was racing, trying to find a polite but firm way to get him to leave. The Canadian politeness ingrained in me from my upbringing was screaming at me not to be rude, not to make a scene. But the primal, instinctual part of my brain was flashing bright red warning signals. You know, he said, his voice closer now. I jumped, sloshing some water onto the counter. He had shifted, closing the small gap between us. Jessica had a friend once. Nice girl, just like you. Moved into a new apartment downtown. Didn't know a soul. I turned off the tap, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't turn around. I kept my back to him, staring at the bland, beige tiles of the kitchen backsplash. She was too trusting, he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Let a guy from the gas company in without checking his ID properly. They found her 3 days later. It's a terrible world, Chloe. Just terrible. My blood ran cold. The story was so specific, so graphic. Was it even real? It didn't matter. The intent behind it was clear. It was a threat veiled as a cautionary tale. He was telling me what could happen to women like me. To me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. That's horrible, I managed to say, my voice trembling. I finally turned around, forcing myself to look at him. I needed to see his face. His expression was one of solemn concern, but his eyes held a glint of something else. Something calculating. It is, he said, nodding gravely. That's why you gotta be careful. You never know who you're letting into your home. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. He was saying this to me, while standing uninvited in my home, long after his purpose here was served. Well, I really appreciate you helping me out tonight, Bill, I said, trying to steer the conversation back to its natural conclusion. I couldn't have managed those boxes on my own. But it's getting really late, and I have to be up early for my first day at the new job tomorrow. It was a lie. My job didn't start for another week. But I was desperate. Oh, of course, he said, holding up his hands in a gesture of surrender. But he still didn't move towards the door. Instead, he gestured to the box with my mug. Let me at least help you with that. A nice cup of tea, that's what you need after a long day like this. English breakfast, is it? He'd seen the label on the box of tea bags. He was paying attention to every little detail. I felt a fresh wave of nausea. My desire for a comforting cup of tea had vanished, replaced by a desperate urge to be alone. That's really kind of you, Bill, but I can manage, I insisted. You've already done so much. Nonsense, he said, brushing past me to grab the box of tea bags. His arm grazed mine, and his touch felt electric, sending a jolt of pure revulsion through me. I insist. It's the least I can do. A little bit of housewarming. He was opening the box, his thick fingers surprisingly nimble. He was acting like this was his kitchen, like he belonged here. My kitchen. My apartment. My safe space. And it was being violated, inch by inch. I watched, frozen, as he dropped a tea bag into my favorite mug. The kettle clicked off, and he poured the boiling water with a steady hand. He was making himself at home. And with every passing second, the apartment felt less like mine and more like a cage. There you go, he said, pushing the mug towards me across the counter. Now, doesn't that feel better? I stared at the steaming mug. It felt like a prop in a surreal play. I couldn't drink it. I didn't want to accept anything from him. Accepting it felt like consenting to his continued presence. Thank you, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I needed a new tactic. Politeness wasn't working. Hints weren't working. I had to be more direct. But the fear was paralyzing. He was a big man, much bigger and stronger than me. The door was on the other side of the room. He was standing between me and my only exit. I decided to try my phone. I'd call a friend, my best friend, Sarah, back in Vancouver. I'd talk loudly, mention that my boyfriend was on his way over. A classic, but maybe it would work. I patted the pockets of my jeans. Nothing. I glanced at the small table by the door where I'd left my purse and keys. My phone wasn't there. Looking for something? Bill asked, his eyes sharp. He'd followed my gaze. My phone, I said, trying to sound casual. Just wanted to check the time. It's almost midnight, he supplied helpfully. You probably put it down somewhere while we were moving the boxes. It'll turn up. He said it with such finality, such certainty. And then I knew. He'd hidden it. While I was in the bedroom, directing him where to put the dresser, or in the bathroom, clearing a space for the box of toiletries. He'd had plenty of opportunities. He'd been planning this. This wasn't a spontaneous act of creepiness. It was methodical. The room suddenly felt very cold. The friendly, bumbling handyman persona had completely dissolved, replaced by something cold and predatory. I was looking at the real Bill now, and he was terrifying. I think I'll have a cup of tea myself, if you don't mind, he said, already reaching for another mug from the box. It's a chilly night. My mind was a whirlwind of panic. My phone was gone. The door was blocked. I was on the third floor of a building in a city where I knew no one. Screaming was an option, but would anyone hear? Or would they just dismiss it as late-night revelers? I had to stay calm. I had to pretend everything was normal. Panic was what he wanted. He was feeding off my fear. I could see it in the slight smirk playing on his lips. Of course, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Help yourself. I picked up the mug of tea he'd made for me. My hands were shaking so badly that the hot liquid sloshed over the rim, scalding my fingers. I barely felt it. I walked over to the small dining table, my legs feeling like they were made of lead, and sat down. I needed to create some distance between us. I needed to think. He hummed a tuneless melody as he made his own tea. It was a cheerful, jaunty tune that was horrifyingly out of place. He was enjoying this. This was a game to him. He brought his mug over to the table and sat down in the chair opposite me. See, isn't this nice? He said, taking a loud slurp of his tea. Just two new friends, sharing a cup of tea. Friends? I repeated, my voice flat. Sure, he said, smiling. It was a wide, predatory smile that didn't reach his eyes. I feel like we've really connected tonight, Chloe. I'm a good judge of character. And I can tell you're a good person. A kind person. A lonely person. His words hit me like a physical blow. Lonely. Was I that transparent? The move had been hard. I'd left my entire life behind for this job. I was lonely. But hearing him say it, using it as a weapon against me, made me feel sick. I'm not lonely, I lied, my voice cracking. It's okay, he said, his voice soft and soothing, which was somehow more terrifying than if he'd yelled. We all get lonely sometimes. That's why we need people. People to look out for us. People to keep us safe. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. Take your lock, for instance, he said, his voice dropping again. My lock. The deadbolt on your front door, he clarified. It's an old one. Easy to pick. Not very secure. I took a look at it when we were bringing in that big armchair. He winked. I'm a bit of a handyman, you know. I noticed the cylinder was loose. A little wiggle and it would be useless. My blood turned to ice. He hadn't just looked at my lock. He'd tampered with it. He'd been systematically dismantling my security, my safety, one piece at a time. The phone. The lock. What else had he done? I thought about the windows. The apartment had a fire escape, but the window leading to it was in the living room, just a few feet from where we were sitting. And I remembered him struggling with it earlier, complaining that it was stuck. Had he been closing it, jamming it shut, while pretending to help? I had to get out. Not later. Now, the pretense of politeness was over. This was a survival situation. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. Bill looked up at me, his expression one of mild surprise. "I'm feeling really tired, Bill," I said, my voice hard and cold. "I need you to leave. Now." He stared at me for a long moment, the smile slowly fading from his face. The mask was off. The predator was looking at its prey. "I don't think so, Chloe," he said softly. "I think you and I are just getting to know each other." He started to rise from his chair, and in that moment my survival instinct kicked in, overriding the fear. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my mug of tea, the tea he had made for me, and threw the scalding hot liquid straight into his face. He roared in pain and shock, clawing at his eyes. It was the opening I needed. I didn't run for the door. He'd get there before me. I ran for the bedroom. It was my only chance. I slammed the bedroom door shut just as he crashed against it. I fumbled with the cheap, flimsy lock, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. It clicked into place just as he started pounding on the door. "You stupid bitch," he bellowed, his voice muffled by the wood. "You're going to regret that." The door shuddered under the force of his blows. The flimsy lock wouldn't hold for long. I scanned the room, my eyes wild with panic. The window. It was my only way out. It was an old sash window and it was painted shut. I'd noticed it earlier and made a mental note to get some tools to pry it open. Now, I had to open it with my bare hands. I threw all my weight against it, pushing and pulling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The wood groaned in protest. Behind me, the bedroom door was splintering. I could hear the wood cracking. He was going to break through any second. With a final, desperate heave, the window shot open with a loud crack. Cool night air flooded the room. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled out onto the narrow fire escape, my heart pounding in my ears. I was 3 stories up. The metal rungs were cold and slick with dew beneath my bare feet. I heard a final crash from the bedroom as the door gave way. I didn't look back. I scrambled down the ladder, my hands slipping on the cold metal. I jumped the last few feet, my ankles jarring as I hit the pavement of the dark alley behind the building. I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran, my bare feet pounding against the cold, gritty asphalt. I didn't stop until the sound of sirens filled the air, getting closer and closer. I collapsed onto the curb, gasping for breath, as a police car screeched to a halt in front of me. The aftermath was a blur of police officers, paramedics, and the sterile, impersonal environment of a hospital emergency room. They treated the minor burns on my hands and the cuts on my feet. They asked me endless questions, and I answered them in a numb, detached voice. They caught him. They found him still in my apartment, trying to jimmy open the window in my living room. He was surprisingly calm, they said. He told them he was just a handyman I'd hired, and that I'd had some kind of hysterical episode and attacked him. But the evidence told a different story. My disabled deadbolt, my hidden phone, which they found tucked away in his jacket pocket, and his record. His name wasn't Bill, it was Mark, and he had a long and disturbing history of similar incidents. He preyed on women living alone, using his friendly, harmless persona to gain their trust before isolating and assaulting them. He was a monster hiding in plain sight. I never went back to that apartment. I couldn't. The thought of sleeping in that bedroom, of making tea in that kitchen, made my skin crawl. My landlord was surprisingly understanding and let me break the lease. My company put me up in a hotel until I could find a new place. I found a new apartment in a secure building with a doorman. It's more expensive, but the peace of mind is priceless. I have 3 locks on my door now. I check them every night before I go to bed. I don't use apps to hire strangers anymore. I don't trust easily. Maybe I never will again. It's been 6 months and the fear has mostly faded, replaced by a cold, hard knot of anger. Anger at him, for what he did, for what he tried to do. And anger at myself, for being too polite, for ignoring the red flags, for not trusting my gut. I still think about that night sometimes. I think about how easily it could have gone the other way. If I hadn't thrown that tea. If I hadn't been able to get that window open. It's a chilling thought. A reminder that the real monsters aren't hiding in the shadows. They're the ones who smile at you, who offer you a cup of tea, who call you by your first name like a friend. They're the ones you let into your home. So, to the man I met on the Tasker app, the man who called himself Bill, I hope you're rotting in a cell somewhere. And I hope that every time you close your eyes, you see my face. Not the scared, trembling girl you thought you could break, but the woman who fought back. The woman who survived. And I want you to know that you didn't break me. You made me stronger. You made me a fighter. And I will never, ever be too polite again. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and give this video a like. We appreciate everyone and can't wait to bring more stories your way.